Hi, historians. Let's continue working on our Revolutions in World History assignment. I'm going to click on the instructions and let's read them together. Now, before we freak out, when is this due? It's due May 1st. Okay, so we've got 3 weeks. The instructions say, read each of the short chapters assigned, chapters 25, 26, and 27. We have 3 chapters, 3 weeks. If you're pacing yourself, you could do 1 a week and not stress at the end. So read each of the short chapters, follow along reading with Dr. D in the videos, which you're doing. For each chapter, answer the Check Your Knowledge quiz questions on the corresponding Google form. So for each chapter, I've created a Google form with the exact same Check Your Knowledge questions that are at the end of the reading. And after you read all the chapters and take all the quizzes, write a paragraph reflection on the Google Doc with your name. Okay, let's get started on chapter 26. Now remember, your Chromebook and my computer just love to post this in a way that makes it really wonky. On your Chromebook, you push Control and then the refresh, the little arrow at the top of your keyboard to spin your page around. Mine is a little different, so I did it my way. And now let's take off reading. All right. Chapter 26, the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. Our last chapter, chapter 25, was about the American Revolution, and it happened before the French Revolution. But remember, the American Revolution was inspired by French things in the Enlightenment, right? Like liberty, equality. Got it? All right. So a lot of blending of ideas. All right, let's continue with the reading. I do want to point out the wonderful map. All right, let's get started. Like the Americans, the French wanted to overthrow their royal government. They were tired of the injustice of the class system in France. The first shot in the battles of Lexington and Concord in the American Revolution was called, quote, the shot heard round the world, in part because it showed people of other countries that they could replace monarchy with democracy. Discontent rises in France. France, like England, had to repay war debt. To figure out how, in May 1789, French King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General, which included representatives from the 3 estates of French society. The first estate was the clergy. It was a mix of poor parish priests and cardinals and bishops from noble families, and it made up the smallest part of the population. The second estate was the nobility. The nobility made up a larger share of the population and owned about 1/4 of the country's land. The third estate was peasants, craft workers, and middle-class members of society who formed about 70% of the French population, but owned very little land compared to the other estates. Many of them didn't have any land to live on at all. Members of the third estate resented the privileges granted to the nobles. Neither the first nor the second estates were required to pay the French tax on land called taille. Only the poorest paid. Now, we looked at this triangle in a stations activity, and so I want you to think about the estates as shaped like a triangle. So who's at the very, very, very top? King Louis XVI? You're absolutely right. Then underneath, the first estate, or a little bit more. Then the second estate, a little bit more. But down at the bottom, the base of this triangle, the base of their whole society, were the third estates, peasants. All right. Let's read this little bubble because it's really important. Bourgeoisie, have you ever heard that word before? Bougie? All right, what does bourgeoisie mean historically? The middle class in France was also called the bourgeoisie when the term denoted someone who lived in a walled town. But for the sake of the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie were the middle class. Okay, continue with the reading. Bad harvests in 1787 and 1788 led to food shortages, rising food prices, and unemployment. The king continued spending his wealth on fancy entertainment and elaborate dinners. The people were starving, and there was his wife, Marie Antoinette, throwing another party. The people take action. Fed up with the monarchy's system of ruling and desperate for change, in June 1789, members of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly, a new governing body for France. The National Assembly had to meet in an indoor tennis court because they were locked out of the meeting hall in Versailles. They believed the king was trying to get them to disband, break up. In what was known as the Tennis Court Oath, they swore to continue meeting until a new constitution was written. Louis XVI encouraged nobles and the clergy to join this new assembly, while at the same time mobilizing troops to dissolve it. On July 14, 1789, French citizens in Paris stormed the city's prison, the Bastille, in search of weapons and ammunition to defend themselves, but no ammunition was found. The angry crowd destroyed the Bastille one brick at a time. Revolts spread across the country. Our little bubble says July 14th is now known as Bastille Day and celebrates French independence. It's like France's July 4th. Up to the top, more changes in the government. The National Assembly took over to create a government based on the new American democracy. The French wrote a document called the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Approved in 1789, it granted basic rights to individuals, such as liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Many noblemen and clergy left France and convinced countries like Prussia and Austria to invade. The French government arrested the king for supposedly supporting these armies. A new constitution was set up in 1791 calling for a limited monarchy. There was still a king, but he was limited by the power of a legislative assembly, which would make the laws. However, the new government allowed only men who paid certain taxes and who were over 25 to vote, which was still not equality for all. Problems in France escalate. On top of all this, the people of France were still hungry. Mobs in Paris became violent. The Paris Commune, a group of radicals, called for universal male suffrage, the right to vote, and for the Legislative Assembly to suspend the monarchy. In 1792, a new national convention began meeting. They drafted a new constitution and abolished the monarchy to form a republic, but it was unstable. Leaders struggled for power and the National Assembly became divided. Various political clubs had formed during the Revolution, each with its own ideas about how the republic should work. A group led by Maximilien Robespierre, called the Jacobins, declared a policy of terror to control their opponents, arresting people left and right for supporting the king or disagreeing with their decrees, their formal orders having the force of the law. During the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, thousands of people were guillotined at a public square in Paris that is now called Place de la Concorde. And this is a guillotine, including Marie Antoinette, so she was guillotined. Louis XVI was executed a few months before the Reign of Terror began. Robespierre and the Jacobins ruled as dictators under the title of the Committee of Public Safety. They kept an army of over 1 million men to push back invaders in the French Revolutionary Wars, 1792 to 1802. In July of 1794, Robespierre was arrested and accused of being a tyrant. He was executed the next day. A new leader comes to power. With Robespierre's death, the Reign of Terror came to an end. A new government, the Directory, took over, but they were weak. People did not know the best way to rule the country. A national army hero named Napoleon Bonaparte abolished the Directory and set up a new government in 1799, finally ending the French Revolution. 5 years later, he declared himself Emperor Napoleon I. By 1812, Napoleon had expanded France's empire to include present-day Italy, Germany, Switzerland, and other European countries, but not Britain or Russia right here. Next page. British Viscount Horatio Nelson defeated Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Napoleon was a famous war leader who expanded France, but he made the mistake of expanding too much by invading Russia. His troops froze and fled. He created the Napoleonic Code in 1804 to protect individual liberty, property rights, and the right to work, and the right to one's own opinions. All citizens were equal before the law. On the negative side, he censored nearly all of France's newspapers and books to protect his image. He had mail opened by the government police. Liberty was replaced by despotism. Despotism is a system of government in which the ruler has absolute, unlimited power. Eventually, Napoleon was exiled or forced voluntarily from his country. Eventually, Napoleon was exiled from France by an alliance of European countries, but he escaped and went back to France. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in present-day Belgium in 1815 and was exiled again until his death in 1821. The emperor was gone, and the French still hadn't created a democracy. Okay, thanks for reading along with me. You have your Check Your Knowledge questions to answer. And if you are interested in Napoleon, he's a fascinating figure in world history. He was actually, the second time they put him in prison, he was actually on an island, and that's where he died. So, all right, thanks for reading along. See you later.